Welcome to this latest Emerging Threats group. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. So today we are going to test a 1990 US Navy carrier battle group versus a circa 2030 US Navy carrier strike group. The 1990 US carrier battle group will mostly be using Gulf War era assets. So we're talking 1990, 1991. Whereas the US Navy 2030 force will be using maybe like late 2020s vessels and aircraft, as well as what we kind of expect maybe around in the year 2030. The battle will take place in May 2030. It will be in the Pacific Ocean, in the vicinity of Hawaii and Midway. The US Navy forces of 2030 have a base on Hawaii, and the forces of 1990 have a base on Midway. The aim of this is to test how a Gulf War US Navy carrier battle group fares against a post-modern 2030 US Navy carrier strike group. As many of you know, and if you've seen the final countdown, there is a huge technological gap between something like an A6M0 and an F-14 Tomcat. But I mean, how does a slightly more updated Tomcat, the F-14B or Bravo, compared to the F-35C Lightning, especially if it's carrying the latest AIM-260 missiles? So what we have here is a list of the 2030 forces with our carrier. We also have a unmanned surface vehicle mothership. We have a what would have been a cruiser version of the Zumwalt. So that is a little bit hypothetical. I mean, but we don't really know what the US Navy may have in 6-7 years. It's unlikely they will have a whole new cruiser class, but we did need something to chuck in because the Ticonderoga will be retired shortly. It certainly will be retired by then. We do have our Zumwalt class. This one is armed with hypersonic weapons as opposed to any other weaponry. However, the hypersonics can't be used against ships, so it might not be all that useful in this conflict, but it does still have long-range anti-ship missiles and maritime strike tomahawks on board. We have 2 flight-free Arleigh-Burke destroyers, 2 Constellation frigates, supply vessel, and we also have several unmanned ships as well, and like the smaller vessels for support. If you remember the BBG Iran video in the Straits of Hormuz, we did have Phantom and Ghost in that, and we've also got them in this as well. The Ghost probably will not be launched from the USS Spectre, but we'll see how it goes. In terms of the submarines, we have Virginia-class Flight 4s and 5s, and we also have a USS Seawolf, which is the SSN-21. The air wing, we have Hawkeyes, Valkyries, the Sea Guardian, which is like a short takeoff and landing UAV. We also have 2 squadrons of flight-free Super Hornets. One's a single-seat version, the Echo. Another squadron is the 2-seat version, the Foxtrot. Both of these do have CFTs on board as well, which, as far as we're aware, may or may not come into service. Last we heard is they're probably not going to be used on ships, but you never know. That may change by 2030 if the US Navy's even really got that many Super Hornets left at that point. We do have the Growlers, 6 of those. We have 2 squadrons of F-35C Lightnings, which will probably be our mainstay of the attack force. We have 12 MQ-25 Stingrays. We are going to be using some for air-to-air refueling, but we also have got some ready for ISTAR as well. I may even have some armed. And then, mostly for the UCAB point of view, we're going to be using the X-47 Bravos, which it was kind of a program that led on to the Stingray, but again, we're more using them to stimulate the type of UCABs the US Navy may have in another 6-7 years or so. We do also have our Seahawks for ASW and our Vigilance, mostly for ASW, but we also have some loaded up for anti-ship work as well, but they don't really have the range to affect this battle most likely. We have some Nighthawks, again they probably won't be much use, or nor will the Ospreys either, in this case, the transport versions of them. On Hawaii, we do have 4 B-21 Raiders, which are mostly armed with long-range anti-ship missiles, but we do also have some JATMs on board them as well for air-to-air use. We have 2 SR-72 Aurora spy planes, which is basically an upgrade to the Blackbird. It is an almost 3,000 knot capable aircraft. We have 4 P-8 Poseidons, armed with both anti-ship and anti-submarine weaponry. We have 10 KC-46 Pegasus tankers. Unfortunately, Command doesn't actually have any like the stealth tankers yet, like the blended wing body ones, and probably won't for a little while as we don't really know what they are, but in an ideal world I'd use some of those. We have an RQ-180 Bravo, which is a slight modification to the RQ-180, giving it some better sensors. We also have some MQ-4 Sea Tritons. For the 1990 forces, we have two Nimitz-class nuclear-powered carriers. It's worth pointing out that I can only really think of two advantages that the US Navy of 1990 would have over a force about 40 years in the future of it, and that is numbers, because the US Navy got up to almost 600 ships in the late 1980s and must have been somewhere around the 500 to 600 ship point in about 1990, giving them almost twice as many, or maybe even twice as many ships as the current US Navy has, and maybe what the 2030 US Navy would have, depending on the numbers of UAVs involved, or USVs in this case. So yeah, one huge advantage would be numbers. Another advantage is that the vertical launch systems that are used on most modern ships, and even some ships around 1990, cannot currently be refueled at sea. Whereas the I think it's Mark 26 launch systems could in theory be refueled, rearmed at sea. But this scenario is not going to be long enough to demonstrate that. But the fact of the matter is the US Navy of 1990 has about twice as many ships in this scenario, certainly probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 times the amount of tonnage that the 2030 Navy has. We've added in the USS Missouri, which is a battleship. It's mostly armed with it still has its big guns on, and it does also have anti-ship missiles and the Tomahawks, like the Bravo variant. But they don't really have a very long range, so again, one of the biggest issues the 1994 is going to have is the lack of range and the lack of sensors kind of to reach out and detect the 2030 group. They do have one nuclear-powered cruiser, a Leary-class cruiser as well as 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, so that's pretty much 4 cruisers in total. They have one Arleigh Burke Flight 1 DDG, which is one of the few that was actually around at that point. I may have been slightly optimistic giving it that one. It may have been in trials rather than operational, but we figured it'd be worth giving them one Arleigh Burke. They've got 2 Spruance-class DDGs, a Kidd-class DDG, 2 Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates, and also 2 Knox-class frigates, and also 2 fast combat support ships. In terms of submarines, they do have 4. All of them are Los Angeles class subs. They have 2 Flight 1s, 1 Flight 2, and 1 Flight 3. In terms of aircraft, you can see they've got a lot of aircraft available to them. Almost 50 Tomcats in total, 10 Hawkeyes, at least 60 Hornets, I'm counting there, 24 Intruders, 12 Prowlers, 6 refueling Intruders, 6 Vikings. They've got some Greyhounds as well, not like there'll be any use. They've got over 30 anti-submarine helicopters, and also 4 like little drone type things, the RQ-2 Alpha Pioneers, which are from the battleship. In terms of midway, they've got 4 Bravo, B-52 Golf Stratofortresses. Those are all armed with harpoons. They've got 2 SR-71 Blackbirds for reconnaissance purposes. They also have 3 U-2 type aircraft, the U-2R and the TR-1A Dragon Lady, which are both pretty similar aircraft really. They've got 4 P-3 Orions, which are one of the latest variants for that time period. They also have 10 tankers in total, split between the KC-135R Stratotanker and 4 KC-10A extenders. In terms of the weather, it's going to be moderate high clouds, which are broken at 25 to 28,000 feet, no rain. Sea state is 2, and in which case we will get on with the scenario. As you can see, we have all our ships here, and then in our battle group. So we have some of our unmanned ships doing ASW work on the periphery, and then we have some of our almost like the Corvette class Phantoms also kind of doing the ASW work, but they do also have access to anti-ship weapons, but the range is quite short. As you can see here, the range is not much over, I don't think it's even quite 120 nautical miles. Coming in from near Hawaii are our B-21 Raiders. Again, they have the 16 long-range anti-ship missiles, a pair of them, so giving us 32 long-range anti-ship missiles from the Raiders and 64 JATMs. Here we have our aircraft from Hawaii, which are launching currently. And we have have plenty of our helicopters currently scrambling, as well as we have a combat air patrol that we're sending up, which includes F-35 Charlies. We've got our RQ-180 Bravo up at 50,000 feet. We are going to speed him up a bit to get a bit closer to the battle. Our submarines have already spawned into position. These are like randomly teleported at the start of the scenario, so we know there's 4 enemy subs out there as well. I mean, I did try and get the ships to randomly spawn, but that kind of spreads them out all over the map and doesn't do a great job of it. So, fortunately, I kind of know where the enemy are in this case, but I can't. Well, it doesn't also. Well, the good thing is with the 2030s tech is we really can detect pretty much any emission that they throw out, as you can see here. In fact, what we will be doing as soon as it gets airborne is sending our Aurora, our SR-72, straight over to go and find the enemy fleet. What I have done, in order to make it so we can set up strikes a bit easier from our ships, is put them on hold in terms of anti-surface weaponry. So they will not auto-fire as soon as the enemy fleet is detected. That is to make it so I can get some drones and other aircraft up first to get the enemy 1990 fleet's attention, and then I can launch my missiles in and try and make it more of an overwhelming strike as opposed to more of a piecemeal strike. It's going to be very difficult, I would say, for a 1990s force, even with circa twice the numbers, to overwhelm a 2030 force, especially at this kind of range. I mean, this kind of conflict could take place at even a longer range, and that will give the 2030 force even more of an advantage, just because they have better sensors available to them, more unmanned aircraft that can do more type of I-star capabilities. One thing that we have with the Aurora is that it almost flies at 3,000 knots. In fact, it's almost up to, there we are, at 2,900 knots, and it's still climbing. It goes up to about 90,000 feet, and there's very little in the way of the 1990s arsenal that the US Navy has that can shoot that down. I believe the RIM 67 might be able to if the Aurora slows down and takes like a very, shall we say, cooperative flight path, but it's almost, but yeah, certainly the Phoenix can't hit it, and none of the other SMs seem to be able to hit it. Whereas for the Blackbird and the U-2, which are both very high altitude aircraft as well, they are much easier to hit for the SM-6 SAM, meaning that, well, almost straight off the get-go, the 2030 force has a huge advantage just being able to find the enemy force. Again, we can literally pick up all the enemy emissions coming in from their fighters and ASW platforms. So we're going to bring our Aurora up from the south to get a lock on the enemy. Here we are. So we've already detected plenty of enemy ships. The Aurora has slowed down. Don't really want it to do that because it may get shot at. As you can see here, there are quite a few Tomcats trying to chase it. They're up at 45,000 feet, but even the Phoenix missile can't engage an Aurora at that height. They have launched a SAM at it, which is probably a RIM 67. It is going to try and get up to it, but I just don't think it can quite get up to the height. There we are, yeah. It can't actually get up to the height just to take it out in time. And if I switch the ECM on as well, on the Aurora, it'll make it even more difficult. They haven't even tried to shoot it again. But we do now have a bead on the enemy fleet. And as you can see, our forces are already launching. So we have our forward combat air patrol, which is going out to sweep the enemy fighters out the way, of F-35 Charlies, armed with 6 JATMs each, because they've got the psychic mod on, giving them 12 AIM-260s in total. We are also going to bring in our B-21s to back them up, as these also have quite a few missiles on board. One of the problems that the 2030s force will have in this case is just the amount of fighters the 1990 force can throw up is actually far more than what we can throw up as the 2030 force, meaning that there is certainly a chance our Alpha Strike will get overwhelmed just by the amount of Phoenixes they can throw at them. However, the F-35C's JATMs certainly outrange the Phoenix, and even if the F-14s could use the Phoenix to its full capabilities against the Lightning, they'd struggle just because of the Lightning stealth capabilities. The Super Hornets obviously don't really have anything like the stealth of the F-35, but they are carrying LRASMs, a long-range anti-ship missile, so therefore they can fire at a much longer range. The F-35s, on the other hand, the ones that we're sending on the strike mission, they are carrying which are, well, I call them hypersonic missiles. They're classed as hypersonic in command, but they're basically 300 nautical mile range missiles that travel at quite a high speed. I don't think it's quite hypersonic. They don't actually have a warhead on board. It is literally kinetic energy they use to destroy ships. They are somewhat hypothetical at this point, but it is something we know the US Navy is looking into. It is a ramjet powered, has a max speed of 3,700 knots. And in the testing we've done, it does seem like the 1990s fleet has nothing that is possible to shoot down those missiles. So if those missiles get close enough to the enemy force, well, if basically the F-35s launch those missiles and they track as advertised, then the enemy forces, at least they're going to take hits, let's put it that way, and it'd be stupid of me not to aim for the enemy carriers. It's not exactly a fair fight, but I mean, what's the point of making it fair? That war is to make it as unfair as possible. Send our growlers in. So as you can see here, we have an enemy SR-71 Blackbird. It's about 1,000 knots slower than our Aurora is, but it is capable of going up to the same altitude. Our JATMs, however, even launched from an F-35 at 50,000 feet, cannot get up to that altitude, so we do have to wait for it to come in closer. Then we can engage it with our SM-6s. Our F-35s are going at Mach 1.6 to attempt to get it. I mean, they're just not going to be able to. It's just too fast, too high, so I may as well put them back down to a slower speed to save some fuel. Luckily, we do have quite a few tanker assets available to us. So it looks like we're already unleashing our long-range anti-ship missiles from our Super Hornets, so therefore I am going to trigger the strike from our surface assets as well. So here we go, now all of our Tomahawks are launching. We're not quite in surface launch LRASM range. As you may remember from our previous videos, they have a range of, I think it's about 500 nautical miles. We're at about 550 at the moment. So that's kind of our reserve strike should our initial strike fail, which hopefully it won't. Once our missiles and aircraft get closer, I can also use our submarine launched weapons as well. Certainly the Block 5 Virginia class has quite a large VLS capability. It can carry 32 Tomahawks on board of it. In fact, it might even be able to carry more, but I've also put some Block 1 Bravo SM-6s as well. In fact, speaking of SM-6s, it is a 1 Bravo here that's been fired at the Blackbird. It is going at 2,900 knots. It's coming from, even with the Blackbird's copiously high altitude, the SM-6 is still coming down from above it. Will it kill it? Yep, it did. It killed the Blackbird. Its ECM was incapable of shooting it down. Its final probability of hit was 57%, and it certainly managed it. So we've got our SR-72 is basically flying circles around the enemy fleet, and then I don't want to get our RQ-180 Bravo too close, although this is a very low observable aircraft. The ESM capabilities, so the abilities to detect even low probability of intercept radars like the APG-85, which we have on this UAV, like the 1990s group, certainly the ESM on the carriers still seems to be quite effective at detecting even newer, even like the latest radars, which is, I didn't actually expect that, to be honest. Whether or not that's completely realistic, I don't know. I was on the impression that LPI AESA radars would be very difficult to detect even at close ranges for 1990s kit. But again, it's going to take someone who probably has a security clearance to actually answer that question reliably. As you can see here, we have sped up our raiders, trying to get them into the fight quicker, but I mean, they're not exactly fast aircraft. Sending our Stingrays in ahead, so we've got 2 of those armed with Stormbreakers, and we also have our X-47 Bravos armed with Stormbreakers. The idea is we're going to try and overwhelm the enemy's SAM system with cheaper munitions first, before our more expensive munitions come in, such as the Tomahawks and the long-range anti-ship missiles. It is entirely possible that the Tomahawks and long-range anti-ship missiles could do the jobs themselves, if the enemy AWACS is destroyed. But we're going to try and make this like an overwhelming alpha strike. We don't want to make this easy for the enemy. Again, there's no point in having a fair fight. If I was trying to be fair about it, I'd let the enemy detect us and then send, let them launch their alpha strike first, shoot it down, then send our forces in. Because even with the amount of harpoons they have, I think they'd struggle to get through the amount of SAMs that the 2030 force have. Even if all the long-range SAMs run out, they've got almost 400 enhanced Sea Sparrow Block 2 shorter-range SAMs. In fact, when you include the hotel model, it's over 400 short-range SAMs. And that doesn't even include the C-RAM missiles as well. So all in all, you'd be really struggling to overwhelm the air defences on a 2030 fleet, especially again when you tie in all the CEC capabilities and just better sensors. It might be a test we have to do at some point just to see if or how a 1990s era task force could overwhelm a 2031, but it would take a lot of munitions. I can't see it being an easy task. If anything, it might be easier for the 1990s Russians fleet to have a go at it, or at least their backfires to have a go, because their weapon systems are quicker, but we'll have to see how that goes in a future video, perhaps. In fact, speaking of which, we'll probably also have to put this 1990 group against a Soviet backfire raid just to see how it does. So as you can see here, we have our missiles. We have 16 fired against this vessel here. We also have only 4 against each carrier at the moment, so I may have to manually start designating some missiles to go after the carriers. And for some reason 53 have been fired against the Arleigh Burke class destroyer here. Again, I know the Arleigh Burkes are capable ships, but I don't think 53 missiles are entirely necessary. In fact, because the data link is online, we can redirect these Larazums in flight. So we're going to send them after the Eisenhower. And we'll try and send some after the Roosevelt as well. We've got our Tomahawk MSTs. There we go, so we've redirected some of the weapons. Yeah, there's a lot less missiles going for the frigate now. And then where is the ones that are going for the Arleigh Burke? Because again, that certainly doesn't need as many. Probably do need quite a lot going to the battleship, just because of how well armoured that thing is, especially in comparison to modern ships. The modern ship's armour is almost like paper thin in comparison to that. However, obviously modern ships do still have good damage control systems and damage control parties. See if make sure all our Tomahawks have launched. Yep, every single Tomahawk has launched. We're still not in a long-range anti-ship missile range, or at least the surface launchers, and I doubt we'll see any NSMs launched either, just because of the sheer range of it. And if worst comes to worst, the 2030s force could also use its SM-6 Block 1 Bravos to engage enemy surface vessels as well as aircraft. So it is possible the enemy fighters have detected our Stingrays. Oh no, those are the Valkyries. Yeah, the Valkyries are not that stealth. They are definitely low observable, but they're not exactly very low observable. So we've switched their radars on to give us a better bead of the enemy task force. And we've got some Hornets out, but they're offline at low level as opposed to higher level. And we've got some F-35 steaming ahead. Again, we don't really want to burn all their fuel at the moment, especially going after low altitude targets. The Hornets are going to be less of a threat to us than the Tomcats are most likely. No, they're the higher altitude Tomcats. This ship wasn't, well, this sub wasn't quite so far away. I could even possibly use some of the SM-6s against these forces. I wouldn't say there's much point yet. We'll see how our F-35s do. So in fact, we are actually now in our anti-ship missile range for the hypersonics. So I'm going to start engaging the enemy carriers. Again, this is almost an I win button at this point, just because there's nothing the 1990s force can do against them. But again, war isn't meant to be fair, especially when there's a 40-year difference. You'd expect the modern force to have far more of an advantage against the 1991. Again, how these missiles would do against Soviet era one, which do also have some pretty advanced SAMs, would be interesting to find out. And I know certainly the modern Chinese and modern Russian SAMs would certainly have a fighting chance of shooting these missiles down. Still might not be easy, but it would certainly actually have a chance of doing it. So they come in the flank at 65,000 feet at 3,700 knots. Our F-35s are also engaging against the Tomcats. And those aircraft are down too low to be much of a bother at the moment. However, we don't really want them staying low, then getting involved with our forces, shall we say. So we will send the F-35s after them at a lower altitude. Looks like we're engaging one of the enemy Hawkeyes. Here come our hypersonics. It looks like one may have been shot down there. Oh no, it actually hit the frigate. It went for the wrong target. So if 2 missiles have hit the Eisenhower, it did try and jam them, but it doesn't look like it was possible. Looks like 1 missile may have been distracted and gone for the Missouri. And it also looks like one of the missiles may have been distracted by chaff or something similar. But certainly at least 1 missile has hit each carrier. And we have more where those are coming from. It's literally just sunk a frigate, you know, with maybe 1 or 2 hits. Yep, so we're now shooting down the enemy forces that are at low level. And now it's also time for our submarines to join the party, so we'll bring them up to a shallower depth. And so anything above, I believe, in command is 164 feet. The submarines will engage with their own Tomahawk missiles. Might be all the F-35s out of their hypersonics. Oh no, there we are. So it looks like we've already sunk 1 carrier. So again, that happened very early on in the battle. It really had, you know, our Alpha strikes barely even made it yet. Most of our anti-ship missiles are still about halfway to the target. Some haven't even made it halfway. So again, if the US Navy has a few of those missiles, combine it with some of the other ones, then so something like, you know, even against a modern fleet, if you maybe use some Stormbreakers first to soak up some of the enemy SAMs, then you could literally launch some of those missiles in, and they'd give even a modern carrier strike group, such as a Chinese or a Russian one, a very bad day. So what we'll do now is target some of the other what he classes biggest threats. So we've got some more. So those ones are going for the Roosevelt. There's 4 of them going in total. If they all hit, surely there's no way the carrier can survive. Yeah, it looks like the carrier may have been sunk by that. We'll have to wait and find out, though. We might not be able to tell for a moment until we get a better battle damage assessment. Here come some other ones. These are going for the Ticonderoga class. An enemy Orion there. At the moment, I mean, the submarines, in theory, we could have maybe tried to make it so they teleport closer to the enemy fleet, but we also don't want a submarine just to be an instant I win button when it spawns by random too close to an enemy fleet. And then especially with a 2030 submarine, like how easy that would be for a 1990s era battle group to detect, you'd think it would be far more difficult than the other way around. So yeah, it looks like that Ticonderoga might be critically damaged as well. It's on its way down to the bottom. Where's the battleship? Did we see the battleship as well? I wouldn't have thought we'd have sunk that yet. One thing is certain, we'll fire some more of the anti-ship missiles. These are surely got to be the last ones now. Against some more of the picket ships. And we do actually have a Tomcat that's got through, but it's engaging our drones. We have actually lost a drone at that, just because I think our forces are running out of air-to-air missiles, quite frankly, at the front of it. We do have some Growlers coming in. They've only got AMRAAMs as opposed to JATMs, but they have certainly made a mess. I mean, if we look now I mean, we were already on a major victory. We're already probably sunk both carriers at this. And yeah, we shot down 8 Tomcats, or 8 of the Alpha model,
If you look how many Hornets were destroyed, most of them were on the deck. So yeah, both carriers have been sunk, and the battleship as well. And yeah, that's a crazy amount of aircraft we've shot. We didn't even have to shoot down just because they were still on the carrier. We weren't able to get them airborne in time to detect our forces. So yeah, the aircraft that are airborne are engaging our drones. Again, in an ideal world, I'd have more fighters up armed with air-to-air missiles to protect them. But again, if our drones get shot down, it's certainly not the end of the world. What we will do is make sure our Growlers don't get engaged, so we'll engage the enemy ships with our latest variant of the Harm missiles. And then we can get them out there, send them home. Certainly anything that's got a radar on right now, we want to disable it if we can. We have some Super Hornets here. These are carrying, or these are also carrying some Harms. These are carrying more of them, but they don't have their own jammers on. Certainly not to the same extent as the Growlers. Looks like there is a Spruance class destroyer right at the back of the enemy force. Let's see if we can target that. I was worried we may lose a Super Hornet there, but it managed to dodge out the way of the missile. I managed to shoot down one of the Tomcats in reply as well. Yeah, so now we've got a horde of the most advanced Harm variant coming in. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that acronym. Let's fire some of those at that destroyer over there. I mean, as you can see right now, there's a ridiculous amount of missiles coming in for what is left of the enemy fleet, especially considering most of them probably won't even be able to fire SAMs properly, just because the amount of anti-radiation missiles that will hopefully damage those radars to the point of being useless. We haven't even had to use our Madal J's yet. They're like the decoy weapons with offensive ECM capabilities. We will launch those. So we've got 16 of those coming in just to cause some extra chaos. And our B-21 Raiders haven't even got into the fight yet either, but we will bring them in closer, because again we want them to use their JATMs to shoot down any enemy aircraft that survive. But I mean, at the moment our losses are, we have actually lost all of our X-47 Bravos, but we've literally lost no manned aircraft at all. Whereas the same cannot be said for the enemy force. And again, if I maybe held off my Alpha Strike a little bit longer and brought the B-21s up to join the first wave of F-35s, we may have been able to mitigate against the drone losses as well. But again, I'm not overly concerned about that. So there is an enemy Tomcat, but he's at low. In fact, there's one at really low level there. There is another one there, which is kind of in the middle of my forces. I may have to try and direct our Growlers to take him out. They've only got one AMRAAM left, and they certainly don't have any guns on board or Sidewinders, so it really will be a one shot and then they're off home. And the chances are that Tomcat's low on fuel, so he might not be able to do much anyway. In fact, what we can do, probably use our JATMs on it from our Raider. Just in case the AMRAAM misses, we'll launch a JATM at it as well. You can see over here we haven't even had to use our Valkyries really. We'll send them forward as well though, just to help out. It looks like the AMRAAM did miss, but the JATM certainly didn't. One less Tomcat, and this other Tomcat looks like he's on the way home as well. He's flying at 2,000 feet flat long, probably means he's low on fuel. As you can see here, we've got our V-247 Vigilance, but they don't really have the range to get involved in this fight, which is why we've consigned most of them to anti-submarine taskings. And to be honest, right now, the enemy submarines are probably about the only threat we would have, but they're probably not close enough to our fleet to actually do any damage. Certainly not in the time frame of this scenario, anyway. The enemy do have some Hawkeyes still up, so there is a chance they've actually detected all these missiles coming towards them, but there's probably just a lot they can do about it at this point. And if I click on the enemy ships, I'll just make sure I've got the right setting on. But yeah, so I've just switched it on, so hopefully all emissions should come up. There we are. So it looks like there are definitely still some radars active. Okay, so we can thin those out again. So yeah, it looks like the fire control ones are the more important ones. The California still has its fire control radar, so does this destroyer here. And also one of the supply ships. Again, I don't even know if that has any kind of defensive weapons apart from maybe a Sea Whiz on board. I don't even think it has Sea Ram. We will try and send some of these missiles after that destroyer there. At the moment we have 58 missiles going for this ship here, which is certainly going to be overkill, what you'd have to think. One of the nice things about the data links is I can literally re-target these missiles in flight if they're not too close to the enemy forces. They have launched some SAMs out, but I mean, the only thing is these missiles might actually miss whether or not they're actually jammed. Yes, they may have jammed some of these missiles, which is why they're sailing past their targets. But we do know some from the previous videos, the maritime strike Tomahawks are not the most advanced weapons compared to certainly compared to LRASM. And speaking of LRASMs, we can also now engage with our B-21 Raiders. There's certainly going to be no survivors in this case. And now we can actually change them to air-to-air. So we'll change them from an air-to-surface mission to an air-to-air, the forward cap. We also have our second group of B-21s coming in as well. Again, with these we may as well hold them off. There's no point in letting them fire their missiles yet. We'll see if any of the 1990 ships survive this barrage. California's just taken a direct hit. Sacramento is taking hits. Surely it can't survive much longer. There we are. That Sacramento is now heavily damaged and is probably sinking. Speaking of which, we may be able to bring in our UAV and get more of a battle damage assessment while it's happening. So, I mean, the enemy have barely managed to lay a scratch, I was going to say, shooting down 12 drones, and then for the loss of almost their entire fleet at this point, certainly a heck of a lot of their aircraft. There goes the other supply ship. That's both their supply ships sank. And looks like the Spruance class with the VLS has also gone down. And we're just waiting to sink the Kid. We've got 55 missiles heading in for the California nuclear-powered cruiser. Pretty much the only fixed-wing aircraft left at this point are ASW aircraft, and maybe we've got one Hawkeye up here, a Prowler there, but I believe the enemy are out of fighters. Looks like we've got one Tomcat running away. Got a U-2 over there. In fact, the B-21s are going to try and shoot him down, but again, he's probably too high up for them to get. However, he's probably not too high up for our submarine with its SM-6s. So using CEC capabilities, we can fire an SM-6. It's probably guided, in fact it's guided by our RQ-180 here, but it can probably also be guided from the B-21s, and it can hopefully shoot down this U-2. Looks like a lot of missiles are missing California just because they've probably gone for other targets. So we'll try and make sure we sink them now. There we are, we've got plenty of Tomahawks coming in. And if they don't do the job, we've got our second group of B-21s, and we've even got some Valkyries coming in with their Storm Raiders as well. Flying up a bit far ahead. Certainly would be very embarrassing to lose a B-21 to a 1990s era carrier battle group, especially when they're almost destroyed at this. Again, I can't, apart from that one Tomcat that's running away, I can barely find anything else that's going to be a threat to us. Certainly if you were in charge of the enemy fleet right now, you'd be pulling back all your assets to your base on Midway, even though there's probably not that much room on it, to whether or not all those assets can actually fit on it. I don't know if you've seen Midway on Google Maps, but there's not an awful lot of landing space on it. I think I was reading on it, they don't even have a permanently manned air traffic control tower. Or maybe not even an air traffic control tower at all, according to I believe it was the Wikipedia page I was reading. So we're about to shoot down one of the intruders, the tanker one. Looks like the California's also gone down. I mean, the amount of missiles we've fired which didn't even find a target because they didn't really have to is rather amazing. Yeah, some of the subs have still got Tomahawks left on board. So, I mean, we are going to try and hoover up some of the enemy aircraft. We'll get our B-21s down to a lower level. I mean, but it's certainly been what you might class as a turkey shoot for the 2030 carrier strike group. It was probably to be expected, to be honest. I mean, you'd like to think that the billions and, if not trillions of dollars that have been pumped into the US defense budget since 1990 would mean that it would be a whitewash, or as close to a whitewash as possible. I mean, again, if you put a 1980s US Navy carrier battle group up against a 1940s Japanese or US Navy one, you'd expect there to be very few losses on the more modern side's team, especially if they use their assets, like use their advantages such as like speed and height. I mean, one thing that is fairly, I don't know if I'd call it strange, but you've got to think like an F-14 Tomcat is not, in terms of its like performance-wise, in terms of just pure aerodynamics, it's not all that different from an F-35 Charlie. If anything, the Tomcat in theory has a higher top speed. Whether or not it can get to that top speed is a different matter. I mean, but again, it's aerodynamically, the Tomcat is not massively different from an F-35. But the F-35 has a way smaller radar cross-section. It has a way more intuitive cockpit. It's only a one-seater that can pretty much do the job as a two-seater due to its electronic capabilities and just the ease to fly it. In fact, an F-35 pilot is less a pilot, more of a systems operator, you'd say. More like a tactician at times as well. I think if you read some of the red flag reports and some of the F-35 pilot reports, that's what it pretty much has become for them. The aircraft can pretty much fly itself, I believe. I mean, that's not unusual these days, certainly. So again, a 40-year gap, even if the forces don't look much different now to how they looked in 1990, just the digital capabilities now are overwhelming, and certainly will be by 2030 as well, when you consider the amount of unmanned aircraft that may be chucked in. I know the US Navy wants to have a 60% unmanned air wing, by around that area, but I mean, there is not that many unmanned aircraft projects that are certainly like in open source that we know of. The X-37 Bravo program was cancelled. The Stingray, the MQ-25, I don't even know if they've officially decided that's going to be armed at this time. So again, those are kind of things that you'd think if they want a 60% unmanned fleet or air wing, then you're going to have to put air-to-air weapons on these. So we're going to try and finish off a few of these helicopters that are running away, but I mean, this fight is pretty much won at this point. We're almost on 50,000 victory points. Again, if you look down here, if you look at the crazy amount of enemy losses, if you look at their expenditures, I mean, they managed to fire off 21 Phoenixes, 10 Sidewinders. They fired off a lot of SM2 medium-range SAMs, the RIM 66 Juliets. They also fired off a few of the older Sea Sparrows, the RIM 7 Mikes. I'm trying to see if they fired off any of the RIM... There we are, yeah, the RIM 67 Charlies, which is the SM2 extended range. They fired off 34 of those. So they did fire off a lot of SAMs, but I believe when I added it up, they had quite a lot more SAMs they could have used. They just weren't able to due to the amount of overwhelming firepower the 2030 Carrier Strike Group was able to bring. So even though the Carrier Strike Group is technically a downgrade from a Carrier Battle Group in theory, you know, I believe it has less aircraft now than the 1990s one did. Probably has less tonnage of ships, perhaps. It's still just the amount of modern capabilities means it's going to be very difficult for an older force to overwhelm a newer one. Certainly at longer ranges. At shorter ranges, maybe that changes a bit, unless you bring lasers into the equation, and then again, lasers will shoot down most weapon systems from that era. So as you can see here, we pretty much fired none of our own SAMs, maybe a couple at the high altitude aircraft, such as the Blackbird and the U-2. So we'll just see how our raiders shoot. It looks like they're shooting down an Orion, or attempting to. And what we'll do, I believe I've got it set up on our weapons release authority, so we weren't wasting missiles on helicopters, but now there's only helicopters left. Make it so they actually can engage them. It might not be very sporting to shoot down enemy helicopters, especially when they don't have any threat at all really against our airborne forces. And what the big red area here I put up so our forces won't engage the enemy base on Midway. I figured, that's more there just to provide for gameplay more than anything. So let's shoot down the enemy tanker. The enemy shouldn't have been launching tankers now in theory, but again, this is a simulation, more of a game than a simulation at this point, so it doesn't really matter too much. So I think we're happy to call it a day at that. We'll just see all our aircraft back on the carrier. So as you can see, all our aircraft are now landing. We didn't even have to use some of our aircraft or a lot of our anti-submarine vessels. And what we can do is kind of, I wouldn't say cheating, it kind of breaks the fourth wall a little bit here. What we can do is find the enemy submarines and actually move them in a little bit closer. So the whole idea is here that we kind of want to see if we can detect these submarines. I don't want to put them just directly under the sonar buoys, but at the same time I want them to be close enough to actually pose a bit of a threat to our carrier strike group. So we'll bring them in around here. They may have to switch sides just so they don't then go a bit haywire. So again, we're going to try and use these last 4 submarines to actually do some damage to the 2030 group. Let's see how that goes. So we're taking it out of God mode and we'll restart. Well, we'll restart it now. So they are unleashing their anti-ship missiles. As you can see, our Constellation class frigate is engaging with its enhanced Sea Sparrow missiles. I didn't actually realise how close our frigate was to that submarine there, so this frigate might actually take damage just because of how close it is. But no, looks like it got some help from its ship nearby, and between them they were able to shoot it down. It looks like our aircraft are also getting involved. I'm not entirely sure if these subs are firing harpoons or the anti-ship Tomahawks. I think they may have put both on board, but I know they've certainly got access to the harpoon missiles. So again, we've already detected this sub here, and this one hasn't even fired. And yeah, it looks like we're now launching a Mark 54, like the rocket launch version, against it. That has fired a torpedo at us, and the frigate is turning away to try and outrun it. We'll Send our Sea Hunter after it, and we've also got, it looks like our MQ-9 is coming in. That's got 2 torpedoes on board. And we also know there's an enemy submarine here. Look, we've detected it. It is a Goblin, but it's doing 20 knots. So at that point, I'm happy to class that as an enemy vessel. I don't believe this ship here has any capability to attack an undersea vessel. Our Sea Hunter does. And we'll also send our anti-submarine helicopters up there as well. So that enemy sub is now sunk, but it has got a torpedo coming this way. A Constellation class will attempt to outrun it until it's go to flank speed. Whether it actually does, we'll find out. Why he's turning around, I don't know. I want you to kill this sub. So this is a Los Angeles class Flight 1. We've got a P8 coming in there to try and find the enemy sub. That torpedo might hit. Again, that's my fault for maybe putting the enemy submarine a bit close. Yep, it has hit, but it hasn't actually sunk yet. It is heavily damaged though, and may still sink because of the fire and the flood. We don't want that our unmanned vessel to get sunk. I'm going to send this Sea Hunter at flank speed. It is armed with anti-submarine torpedoes. Again, if we did lose our unmanned ship, no one's going to lose much sleep over it. But again, we'll try not to lose too much money for the US taxpayer. Someone's launched a... there it is. So our P8s are carrying the... It's like an air-launched rocket torpedo, the Mark 54. Don't ask me to tell you what that stands for, but what it is basically it launches a Mark 54 torpedo with a rocket booster on, meaning it can be launched from higher altitude, and therefore can go a longer range to go and hit the enemy submarine. As you can see, it's still above the sea level here, and then when it gets down to sea level, it'll deploy its torpedo as normal. I mean, one of the nice things about that is it means your MPA can stay up higher, which certainly gives it a longer endurance time. And then also just like the simple thing of being able to... So when I was on the working for the UK Royal Air Force, I did some work with the P8s. And every time they go at like low level over the sea, afterwards they have to get washed to obviously prevent corrosion to the aircraft's body due to the salt water. So again, if you don't have to wash it so thoroughly after every sortie, then that just saves man hours and potential corrosion to the airframe. So I can see why having your MPA still up higher is good for multiple reasons. The only thing is it's also going to be easier to detect on radar and therefore easier in theory to target. But I suppose the other side of that coin is that against something like a man-pad, being up high is the best defense against it. So it looks like we've hit the submarine with one torpedo. Looks like the second one is trying to catch up to finish it off. Why you're not trying to kill it, I don't know. Maybe because there's already been a torpedo fired at it. So at this point, is there another sub out there? Yeah, there's the other sub. Thought I'd put that one. So we'll bring our P8 down to try and get a bead on that one. So it has sunk our unmanned vessel. But again, it's not a huge loss. Torpedo on it. There it is. We'll try and drop another one on it just to stop it from running away. It looks like our air-launched one, the Mark 54 Hayak, didn't quite make it again. I wonder if there is a little bit of a bug with that at the moment, because it doesn't seem like just doesn't seem to have enough power to get to the target, which is strange. So I believe one submarine may have taken a hit there, but at least submarines are quite strong. Yeah, they took a hit, but it hasn't sunk it. One of the things that Command I don't think does stimulate, I could be wrong here, is that I've got to think that if a submarine takes a torpedo hit, then you'd think that its ability to go at very low depths, or high depths I suppose, closer to higher numbers of feet, would be compromised. you know, in theory, these subs might be able to go down to 1,000 feet, but if they've taken torpedo damage, I would imagine that's less than half of that than what they could do safely. But again, I couldn't tell you. I don't think Command models that, and there might be a good reason for it, because it's one of those things probably quite difficult to know for certain without real-world testing and experience. So here we are, we have another enemy sub here, so we're going to try and launch another 2 torpedoes at that one. So we are deploying both active and passive sonar buoys to make sure that we get a proper bead on it. That's another LA class Flight 1. So Constellation class, it is burning, it is flooding, but it is at the moment still afloat. There we are, we have one of our Mark 54 Hawks. Let's see if this version can, or this model will actually reach the enemy sub. We can also try and head it off with our Phantom Corvette type vessel. These have very high top speed, as you can see here, almost, well, yep, over 50 knots. That's over 60, maybe even closer to 70 miles per hour. Not as fast as a helicopter, but it's not too shabby either. Come on, you know you want to engage him. Sending our second Sea Hunter against that one. And we'll send an MQ-9 against that one. There we are, there goes another enemy sub. I believe we've sunk 3 of the 4. I will just confirm that. Yes, 3 enemy submarines sunk. We just got the final Los Angeles Flight 1 class to sink. We have now lost 1 unmanned surface vehicle again. That's only because I kind of broke the 4th wall and cheated on behalf of the 1990s group to just make the end of this video a little bit more entertaining than rather the cakewalk which it pretty much turned into for the 20s 30s group. So here we go. So he doesn't seem to be wanting to engage at the moment, but we do have plenty of other assets moving in. And get ahead of the enemy sub. Yep, we've got 2 MQ-9s coming in for the kill. Even if the P-8's running away. Also bring in another Phantom. The range on these Mark 54 torpedoes. Looks like about 6, maybe 4 to 6 nautical miles. I think it's 4 that command or basically wait to fire at. Okay, this sub's days should be rather numbered at this point. This MQ-9 doesn't have any sonar buoys left at this point. But we will drop 2 torpedoes on it just to try and finish it off, and then this MQ-9 can head back to base. I mean, that is one good thing about the MQ-9 is it's not able to survive in contested airspace, but in most times anti-submarine warfare isn't carried out in contested airspace. So, you know, you're going to certainly have things like combat air patrol fighters around if it is, meaning that it's certainly going to be an area where the MQ-9 could be very useful in, especially if they can use it off carriers like they're testing at the moment. Again, but against, you know, in what you may class as contested airspace, or even where the enemy has even like a fairly rudimentary SAM network, your MQ-9 type UAVs are going to struggle. Apparently no one wants to try and fire at this submarine at the moment. Shouldn't be too long now though. How far is he away? Still about 12 miles. It's too high, that's why he can't fire at the moment. Fair enough. Sometimes they'll automatically descend down to the right height, other times they don't. There we go, that's one torpedo fired. Should be able to fire a second one. There we are. One torpedo hit. Hopefully the second will finish it off. There we go. That is the final enemy submarine sunk, and therefore the final enemy threat, you might say. There is, again, there the enemy I-Star aircraft are flying around up here. They have a jammer. And if I did switch to God mode, you can also see that they have their B-52s, but I mean, there's no point even launching them now. They just get destroyed by our fighters, or maybe even our B-21s. One Tomcat survived the engagement, one KA-6 Intruder did, but that is literally about it. Other than that, it's just helicopters which are trying to make it back to the midway, but I think they'll all run out of fuel before they do. So in terms of this victory, it turned into slightly less of a one-sided victory just because of the breaking the fourth wall I did with the enemy subs, but I mean, it was still a very comprehensive, and you dare may say, an easy victory for the 2030 US Navy. I mean, as you may expect, and again, as the US taxpayer may certainly expect, because otherwise what are the billions, if not trillions of dollars of weapons acquisitions and training gone on. But I hope you did enjoy this video, and we will do a few more of these videos perhaps in the future. We'll certainly be putting both the 1990 carrier battle group and maybe even the 2030 carrier battle group against a contemporary, or maybe like I say contemporary, I say like a 1990s era Russian or Soviet backfire regiment. So something not too dissimilar from the Red Storm Rising Dance of the Vampires type situation, or those of you who've also seen the film version of the Sum of All Fears, they have the backfire raid in that film as well. So yeah, certainly we'll have to see how, I mean, because again, that force we had there, the US Navy 1991, was a very powerful force. You know, there was probably around 200 aircraft on board, and 2 carriers you'd think should be able to defend itself from, 50, 60 odd backfires. But we'll find out about that in a future video. Again, we'll just quickly go over the final scores and losses and expenditures. So we had 28 of those hypersonic or near hypersonic missiles, and they pretty much made a huge mess of the 2 carriers, and then took out a fair few of the escorts as well, or at least neutralised them enough where other weapons could quite easily finish them off. We fired probably more Tomahawks than we needed to, but again, it was let's put it this way, without my breaking the fourth wall, no manned aircraft or assets would have been destroyed. So I suppose that's worth it. And then you look at the copious amounts of losses that the 1990s era carrier battle group was forced to endure. So thank you for watching this video, and please do like and subscribe. And as with many of our videos now, we will be releasing the scenario out to the command the command users, players. So therefore, you can also play through this video, play through this scenario, and see how you would do it. Can you do it without any losses at all, or maybe you'll take more losses? I mean, who knows? But certainly, before too long, we'll release the scenario so you can have a go at that as well. So, as I say, please do like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.